Well, now we have something really very special and very cool. Please welcome to the stage Leah Berman, former White House Social Secretary and Special Assistant to President George W. Bush, and Jeremy Bernard, former White House Social Secretary and Special Assistant to President Barack Obama. They are joined by moderator Maria Saporta, and she is founder and editor of Saporta Report.
All right, welcome. This is such an appropriate discussion for this time. So we're going to talk about civility, and first I'm going to ask both Lee and Jeremy, how did this come about? How did this project come where you found each other and decided to write a book? And Lee, we'll start with you.
Well, I was the social secretary for the George W. Bush administration. And when Jeremy came into the Obama administration as social secretary years later, we have in place a group of all of the former social secretaries who welcome the incoming and offer ourselves as a resource and as a form of support for the newest social secretary. And that is how Jeremy and I met and became friends.
It's called the sorority plus one. I was the first male social secretary, and only.
And only.
So far.
So far. History is still being written.
And for the benefit of everyone in the room who may not know what the social secretary is, maybe Lee, you can describe it, and you can say what it is from the man's point of view in a minute, Jeremy.
Well, the social secretary is not someone who deals with correspondence. It's an event planning job, and we were responsible for about 400 events a year at the White House, so usually multiple events in a day with a very small staff. And the job of the social secretary is not only to make sure the events run smoothly, but to be certain that the president and first lady's policies and entertaining style are reflected in everything we do, whether it's a bill signing, a state dinner, a reception. And there are hundreds of events each year that are done over and over again. There's always a St. Patrick's Day event. There's always a picnic for members of Congress. So there is a template, but then there is the opportunity for social secretaries, and this is certainly true of Jeremy, to do amazing and wonderful and new and groundbreaking things at the White House.
Yeah, so everyone thinks of state dinners, but most of our days are spent, I usually saw the president 5 days a week, because there would be something that he would do, whether it was a press statement or he was going to had a meeting or whatever. The social secretary is responsible for everything that goes on in the White House other than in the Oval Office and the press room. So it was a constant movement, and it was really easy to get kind of wrapped up in the busyness of it. But I would always try to remind myself and my staff, remember, even though we're really busy, to take a moment, breathe, and look and reflect on the history that we're able to be a part of and witness.
As a journalist, I was heartened by the fact that your collaboration was sparked by another journalist. And maybe you can talk about there and where you all decided that there was maybe a need for this book.
Well, we found that even though we worked for very different administrations, we had extremely similar experiences with people. And Roxanne Roberts, a reporter for the Washington Post, knew both of us and said, you two should really do something like a book together, because you get along so well and you understand that the point of being at the White House is maintaining these traditions and these lessons of civility that allow people to govern together amicably. And that was how we got started on this path.
Yeah, I would call my predecessors. I called Lee probably most often. Also Gail Burt, who worked with Reagan, and then the Clinton social secretaries were in town. So we would often talk by phone or meet for a drink or lunch. And I would say, like, I'm sorry to do this while you're having lunch, but we had what turned out to be, we later called during the holiday season, vomit trees. And that is that the eggnog, the White House eggnog is really good, but really strong. And people would start drinking it. You didn't feel like you were drinking that much alcohol. And President Obama used to warn at the beginning of the party, he'd say, hey, everyone, be careful, that eggnog, it will hit you. Well, it always hit someone, and they would suddenly realize they had too much, and they would usually not want to aim for someone, so they turned for a tree. So we had different, and I said, did you guys have that? She said, oh yeah, we had the vomit trees.
Okay, let's move away from that for lunch conversation.
I've got so many more stories about the vomit tree.
This is the book, Treating People Well. In reading it, the message is, it's all about civility and treating people with respect. And maybe you can share with me and with the audience how y'all came up. There are 12 rules. They're not going to go through each one, but 12 guidances of how we can learn or treat that. Let me just put it this way. Theories that y'all found out that were common to both of you that worked in your role.
Well, there's nothing that will crystallize your thinking like the idea that anything you say or do could become a negative press story or embarrass the president or first lady. So every interaction we had all day long, we had that in the back of our heads, and we found that it changed how we treated people. We didn't answer anger with anger. We were polite, we were patient at times when it was really not easy to be patient. And both of us did this, all the social secretaries do this. And over time, when you're looking for the best outcome in every situation, whether it's somebody you talk to for 5 minutes, or it's a boss that you really can barely stand to be around, or a coworker who doesn't support you, you find that you break through with these people and they begin to trust you and they treat you better themselves because they appreciate the fact that you are a person with some equanimity. You're not going to fly off the handle. You're going to behave in a way that they can expect. And when you treat people well, they tend to respond in return. And the great thing about that is it starts to change how you feel about yourself. You start to feel like you're a better person because you are being a better person. And it doesn't matter if it's something like holding the door open for someone, being polite to a cashier in the drugstore and making eye contact and saying thank you instead of staying on your phone the whole time, making a real effort with a coworker who's not carrying their weight. All of these things helped us so much that we thought we should share this with everyone, because you know what environment is not political anymore.
This was really, it's not like we got to the job as experts. A lot of this was on the job training, and a lot of it I still, especially after working with Lee on this project, I think about, and it still takes some practice. I live in Los Angeles. It's really easy in LA traffic to just start honking and screaming. And if someone's endangering my life, I'll honk, but I've learned to take a breath, and you know what? So it's gonna mean 30 more seconds. Does it really matter? And all of that builds on itself, but it takes effort.
And we found that there are certain things, and we put this into the book, very specific things that we all face in life that make us uncomfortable. For example, walking into a room full of strangers and introducing yourself around and melding into the conversation. We write about value of humor and how we really enjoyed working for presidents and first ladies who use their sense of humor to put people at ease. We write about listening actively, and again, we saw our presidents engaging with people, especially when they were non-supporters, and trying to find a point of connection by being especially kind and trying a series of subjects, film, movies, sports, whatever they could, to build a small connection about one thing that would then allow them to see each other as human beings and then maybe move to the bigger, much more difficult issues that they had to address.
And both of y'all were lucky to be working for very civil presidents.
Yes.
I don't know what you mean by that loaded question.
We're going to go there for a minute. Let's talk about the state of our union today and the apparent lack of civility that we seem to be faced with. And if y'all can talk about how it feels to see what's going on, given that you've devoted your life to a lot of these principles of being civil to other people.
Well, Presidents and the people who work for them have spent centuries building up standards and traditions of presidential behavior. And they exist for a reason. It reflects on America as a symbol in the world. It affects our foreign relations with other people. They have expectations of what kind of behavior they're going to receive when they come to America. So we feel that these kinds of things have real value and they're worth pursuing. And I know traditionally leadership comes from the top, and we have followed the examples of past presidents in our personal behaviors, but now I think you have to take it from another direction. We have to think of it as a grassroots effort of passive resistance, to be kind, to be patient, to make an effort with others, to be the opposite of what we see in our leadership, so that they can perhaps learn from us.
You go for it.
I also want to admit that people say, oh, this was such perfect timing. We started working on this before the primaries. So we knew it'd be a presidential election, it'd be divisive, but we had no idea how divisive the country would be and how bitter it would end up by the time the election was over. But the day after the election, I called our publisher, Simon & Schuster. I said, can I just ask, now with so much changed, do we still have a book? And more importantly, do you want, if we don't, do you want the advance back? Because a lot of that is spent. And they said, no. They said the good news is, right now, it will be all the more important, and it turns out to be true.
So what are certain things about the current climate that seem to upset y'all, that put y'all in this, no, this can't be happening?
Well, it's demoralizing to see a president refuse to shake the hand of the leader of one of our most important allies, or to fire his Secretary of State via tweet. This is, I hope, something that's not going to continue after this president. And that's what we all have to safeguard against, that we go back to the way things were before, because it worked. Democracy works through negotiation and cooperation. It does not function well in a polarized environment, which is what we're living in now.
And I want to say that even with, I'm a progressive Democrat, so the current administration does not reflect my views, but I am very supportive of the current social secretary. We both know Ricky, who is in our position. We have been supportive of her. I went to a luncheon she hosted for all the former social secretaries to show it wasn't about the administration on the whole. It was about the job and the respect for the tradition of the job.
She must have a tough job.
Yes.
Okay, enough said. Both of y'all are actually an embodiment of what the book is about. Working for a Republican president, working for a Democratic president. I assume your politics are different, but yet y'all have found a way to collaborate and partner. Mm-hmm. How has that been, and what messages can we take from this short time that we have with you and really apply it to our lives?
Well, I have to say that it's been a complete pleasure working with Jeremy. We want the same things for our country. And so we don't argue about the tiny issues. We look for the places where we can agree, and that's what we put forth. And I think that's more what needs to happen in Washington. We seem to have lost our ability to disagree agreeably with each other, and we need to find our way back to that.
It's not long after my intro luncheon, Lee hosted a lunch for me with a bunch of people that she knew in DC, most who I had not met. And it was an amazingly diverse group. Some very progressive Democrats, strong Republicans. And what was amazing was I left that lunch and I was like, wow, that was fun. And I didn't expect, because we didn't talk about politics. We talked about funny things that happened in our lives or that happened at our work. And it just, you realize how much more there is to connect than to disconnect. And one of the problems with Congress now is they fly in and out. They get there on Monday night and leave Thursday night. So that time to connect is not what it used to be years ago.
And Lee, you said before the program how much you enjoyed working on this book with Jeremy, but y'all have really enjoyed the book tour and getting to know each other and doing these wonderful sessions here. Lee, you also talked about the grassroots side. You know, sometimes I feel helpless, powerless. How do you respond in this day and age? Let's help the audience. Give us some ideas of what we can do to reintroduce civility into society. And
I would say first, buy this book. And, you know, I think it's amazing how much what you would think are little things that don't take much of your time or effort can really make a difference to someone else. And as Lee was saying earlier, just, you know, getting someone a cup of coffee, holding the door open. You know, I used to be really guilty, and this actually changed. I used to be really guilty. I'd get into the elevator, I'd be hitting that close button. And then if someone came in, I'd say, oh, well, I'm trying to get it open. And so now I actually, you know, and I have to think about it. But I hit the hold button. If I know someone's behind me and is coming, I don't try to close it. So little things, it shows you maybe I wasn't such a good person before. But I think humor also helps a lot. It eases tension. There was we both have great stories with our former bosses, and I have great memories with both Michelle and Barack Obama, but one that really stands out was it was shortly after the government shut down and the government was back open, and most of the staff was not allowed to show up for work. And it was the first day back, so there was an event in the East Room, and as the president and vice president were getting ready to be introduced, he looked around in the green room and he says, hey, welcome back, everyone. It's good to have you back. You know, we had Jeremy running things for a while. Oh, that wasn't so good. And I said, yeah, Mr. President, I agree. By the way, now that everyone's back, I can work on that website thing. And there was just, because it was the healthcare.gov. And Vice President Biden, I thought was going to have me shot. And then the president did that big, and I said, too soon? He goes, too soon. But, you know, it just takes little things that can really make the difference to someone's day.
Right. And, you know, if you take a step back, we all have confrontations throughout the course of our day, some big, some small, where someone is being very unpleasant. And instead of just immediately responding in kind, if you take a step back and think, maybe that person has had a horrible day themselves, maybe they're really worried about money, maybe someone in their family is sick and they're not being their best self today. So I'm gonna give them some slack, I'm gonna take a step back and let things go. Just let it go. And with little things in life, the more you let go like that, the happier you are. And, you know, treating people well.
Yeah, we can clap for that.
The wellness part of this is important. The more you treat people well, the better you feel, and it has actual physical benefits. I'm no doctor, but I know I'm a much healthier person now that I've left the White House.
So, civility can be contagious,
Yes.
just as non-civility is contagious.
Right. Bad behavior is contagious, is more contagious, unfortunately, because you see someone act a certain way, and it usually increases the emotion, anger with more anger with more anger. But so it takes more of an effort, but it is contagious.
And I would also say we talk a lot about the importance of truth. And of course, truth is essential in life. But there are also times in life when the little untruths can actually be kinder to do. For example, many people would come to the White House and find that they weren't actually seated at the president's table for dinner and be very unhappy, irate, depressed. And so we would try to make them feel better. And we would say things like, well, you know, I know you wanted to be at the president's table, but the Secretary of Labor specifically asks that you be at his table. And we don't get many requests like that, so I'm sure you understand. And then we'd corner the Secretary of Labor and say, this man was disappointed not to sit at the president's table, and we told him you asked for him. And then he would be nice to them. And so little untruths, but meant to make people feel better.
What do we call that? Fake
Well,
something?
sometimes it's partly being honest is the best policy most of the time. But there were people that said, oh, I know the president and Mrs. Obama, they know me, they want me to be there. I would say something to Mrs. Obama, she'd said, who's that? So I didn't go back to them and say, she didn't know who the hell you were. I just said we tried to get as many, and you could never, I run into people back in Los Angeles, and I say, hey, how are you? They say, I never got invited to the White House. And I'm like, oh, well, it wasn't my house. I mean, I'm sorry, we tried to get as many people in as possible, but there's a degree you've got to fudge a little bit, but do it with a smile.
And social secretaries are always the scapegoats for non-invitees. They think it's us. We've taken them off the list, or we never put them on. And it got so bad at one point, I went to dinner one night at the Palm restaurant in Washington, D.C. with my husband, and that's one of those places where they put pictures of all kinds of people from Washington, caricatures on the wall. And I sat down and looked over at my caricature on the wall, and someone had taken a fork. I was forked. And I never knew who did it, of course, but people take those invitations pretty seriously.
Or their non-invitation very seriously.
In talking about this very interesting club of former social secretaries, y'all continue to bond and support each other. And it doesn't matter which political party y'all represented. Can you talk about how it's really, I'd never even thought about the idea that there would be this group of social secretaries. Tell me about how y'all get together and
Well, they're wonderful. I mean, they date back to the Johnson administration, and Jeremy and I also knew Letitia Baldridge before she passed away, who was Jacqueline Kennedy's social secretary. And they have the greatest stories because, frankly, everyone else around them from their time has passed on, and they can be very honest about the things that happened to them.
That's in the chapter, don't say it until they're dead.
So they give us wonderful stories. Bess Abel tells a great story about Lyndon Johnson. He was hosting a dinner for the King and Queen of Greece, and she heard him bellow at the beginning of the dinner, "Get Bess in here. Everybody, put your forks down." And so all of these very formally dressed people were just paralyzed, and she stepped around the corner and he said, "Bess, the meat smells bad." And she said, "Mr. President, our entree this evening is tornadoes rossini, and what you smell is foie gras, goose liver. That's what it's supposed to smell like." And he said, "Never mind, it's okay. You all can eat." They sat back down. That's what you call a pearl-clutching moment if you're a social secretary. And a few nights later, he called her late at night and said, "You know that thing we had for dinner the other night with the Greeks?" And she said, "Yes, sir, we'll never serve it again." And he said, "You know, if you hadn't told me what that was, I would have told 900 people at the Waldorf Astoria not to eat their food tonight."
Yeah, it's a great resource, and it is. It's funny because every holiday season I would host a lunch at the White House in the West Wing with all the former socials, and then we would go to the actual mansion for dessert to see the decorations. And Mrs. Obama would always stop by and say hello and welcome everyone. And she always said, "Thank you for all the help you give Jeremy. He's doing a great job, but I know it's because of your help, and you're always welcomed here. This isn't political, it's about patriotism." And I think that's how we all felt. And it was a great, and then she would ask me later what the lunch was like. It is such a secret little club. And I said, "Oh, well, they had great stories." And she'd say, "Okay." I was like, "Well, yeah, you're not in the club."
And when y'all were talking about this club, it made me think, our former presidents also have gone into a similar club. As we're speaking here today, we have 3 of our former presidents here to honor our former governor, Lieutenant Zell Miller, and let's all take a moment to honor Zell. He was a Democrat who got along very well with the Republicans. I'll put it to you that way. But anyway, he really was able to do a lot of bridging among the parties. And one of my favorite stories of Zell, he ran against Johnny Isakson, who is a U.S. Senator, and he beat Isakson when he became governor. But later he turned to Isakson to actually be the chair of the Board of Education. And so finding ways that we can rebuild these connections, and I appreciate both of y'all reminding us how we can be more civil with each other and to put aside some of our political differences. Can we give them a big thanks?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.